Right now, something unusual and serious is unfolding in Washington, and most people haven't fully grasped what it could mean yet. It's not just political drama. It's not just another headline you scroll past. This situation has the potential to affect interest rates, inflation, savings, debt, and the overall direction of the US economy. And if you depend on monthly income, social security, retirement savings, or fixed checks, this is something you need to understand calmly, clearly, and without panic. The US Department of Justice has opened a criminal investigation involving the chair of the Federal Reserve. That alone is rare. But what makes this moment different is where economics, law, and politics collide. When those three forces clash, decisions can change faster than people expect, and everyday Americans often feel the impact last, not first. If you've been feeling uncertain lately, if prices still feel high, if interest rates seem confusing, or if you're wondering why the economy feels stuck in between relief and pressure, this situation is part of that bigger picture. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something. When you hear news about investigations, government pressure, and powerful institutions clashing, how do you usually feel? Do you feel confused, concerned, or just tired and numb to it all? Let me know in the comments. Many people are feeling the same way. You're not alone. Now let's slow this down and talk about what's actually happening without exaggeration and without political noise. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is currently under a criminal investigation connected to testimony he gave to Congress. The focus officially is on statements related to a massive renovation project at the Federal Reserve's headquarters in Washington, D.C. These buildings are old. Some date back nearly a century. Renovations were planned, but the cost ballooned to roughly $2.5 billion, with hundreds of millions in overruns. When people hear that number, the natural reaction is shock. How does a renovation cost that much? That question alone is reasonable. Investigators are reviewing whether Powell was fully accurate when he spoke before lawmakers, especially regarding design features, building upgrades, and how much of the final cost had already been determined at the time. On the surface, this sounds like standard oversight, Congress ensuring taxpayer money is handled responsibly. But here's where things stop being simple. Jerome Powell has pushed back publicly, and that is extremely unusual for a Federal Reserve chair. In a public statement, Powell suggested that this investigation is not really about construction costs at all. Instead, he framed it as a test of whether the Federal Reserve can continue to operate independently without fear of political retaliation. In simple terms, Powell is saying this: this investigation isn't about buildings, it's about pressure. And that claim matters because the Federal Reserve is designed to be independent for a reason. Interest rates affect mortgage payments, credit cards, car loans, savings accounts, retirement portfolios, and the overall cost of living. The Fed is supposed to base decisions on data, inflation, employment, economic stability, not political timelines or election cycles. This independence protects everyday Americans from short-term decisions that feel good now but cause long-term damage later. History shows us that presidents and the Fed have clashed before. This isn't new, but what's different now, according to economists and analysts, is how intense and personal this pressure appears to be. Former President Donald Trump has openly criticized Jerome Powell for years. He has repeatedly argued that interest rates are too high and that the Fed hasn't done enough to stimulate growth. He has also publicly questioned Powell's leadership and raised concerns about the renovation costs, even floating the idea of legal action. At the same time, the administration denies directing the Justice Department to target Powell and insists this investigation is about accountability, not retaliation. So here's the tension. One side says this is about protecting taxpayer dollars. The other side says it's about punishing monetary policy decisions, and while both explanations can exist at the same time, the overlap creates uncertainty, and markets do not like uncertainty. Another detail many people miss is who is overseeing the investigation. The case is being handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, led by someone closely aligned with the former president. That alone doesn't prove wrongdoing, but perception matters. Financial markets move not just on facts, but on confidence and credibility. When institutions appear vulnerable to political pressure, trust weakens. Several Wall Street analysts have already described this situation as disturbing and destabilizing, especially with Powell's term as Fed chair nearing its end. Even if the investigation leads nowhere, the damage isn't zero, because once independence is questioned, it doesn't snap back overnight. Okay, but how does this affect me? That's a fair question. In the short term, you probably won't wake up tomorrow and see your mortgage rate suddenly change because of this investigation alone. But the real impact isn't immediate, it's behavioral. When institutions feel pressure, they act differently. If future Federal Reserve leaders believe that unpopular decisions could lead to legal consequences, investigations, or political retaliation, they may hesitate. And hesitation in monetary policy is dangerous. Too slow to act. Inflation lingers longer. Too cautious to raise or cut rates. Economic slowdowns become deeper and harder to fix. This isn't theory. This is how policy mistakes show up in real life. Higher grocery bills, rising insurance costs, slower wage growth, weaker retirement returns. There's also something called a chilling effect. If officials fear consequences, they may speak less honestly to Congress and the public. Transparency drops, trust erodes, and once trust is damaged, markets become unstable. Jerome Powell recently said something that stood out. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. Whether you agree with his policies or not, that statement highlights something important. These decisions are made by humans under enormous pressure, and the system only works when there's restraint on all sides. Timing also matters here. Powell's term as Fed chair is set to end soon, but he could remain on the Federal Reserve Board for several more years. That means this investigation could stretch into a transition period, one of the most sensitive times for financial stability. Markets hate leadership uncertainty. Investors hate unclear signals. And uncertainty usually leads to caution, which slows economic momentum. Lawmakers from both parties have raised concerns. Some worry about the independence of the Federal Reserve. Others argue oversight is necessary when billions of dollars are involved. Supporters of the investigation point out that these buildings are old renovations, require asbestos removal and safety upgrades. Labor and material costs have skyrocketed. From that angle, scrutiny is reasonable, but critics argue that context matters. They point to past investigations that led nowhere and suggest a broader pattern of pressure on independent institutions. And when you line everything up, one thing becomes clear: even if no charges are filed, even if the investigation fades quietly, something has already changed. The idea that the Federal Reserve operates completely free from political influence feels less solid than it did before, and that realization is unsettling, especially for retirees, seniors, and anyone living on fixed income. So what should you do? First, don't panic. Second, stay informed. Third, focus on what you can control. Pay attention to inflation trends. Watch interest rate guidance. Be cautious with debt. Protect your savings. Clarity is one of the most powerful financial tools you have. My goal is not to scare you. It's to help you understand what's happening so you're not blindsided later. Because when big institutions shift, the effects ripple outward slowly, then suddenly. If you found this helpful, make sure to stay connected, ask questions, and keep learning. Your awareness matters more now than ever,